All right, welcome again, everyone, and thank you for joining us. This is a webinar about the Growing MKE project. For those that have been following along, you will be familiar with this content. We heard from community members that are newer to the project that they would appreciate a quick overview of the project. So that's the intent of these webinars, and we're recording and posting them so that they can be reviewed at anyone's convenience. This webinar will include a 30-minute presentation followed by time for questions and answers. I'm Tanya, and I'm joined by Amy, who is co-presenting this evening, Sam, who will be monitoring the chat and facilitating Q&A later on in the session, and Kyle. Feel free to put your questions in the chat during the presentation, and staff will respond after the presentation during Q&A. Okay, now let's get started. Throughout our lives, our needs for housing change. These are some examples of community members in Milwaukee in search of housing. To start today's session, we'd like to launch a poll.
Right. Have you or someone you know looked for a place to live in the last couple of years, either to buy or rent? If yes, was it hard to find a place that met your needs?
All right, we have about 70% participation. So if there's anybody else that would like to respond, please do.
All right, I'm going to close the poll and share the results. So, for everyone that responded, about 83% said that they know somebody or they themselves have been looking for a place to live. 14% no, 3% I don't know. Was it hard to find a place that met your or their needs? 73% yes, 18% said somewhat, and 9% said no. All right, thank you.
Over the course of the Growing MKE project, we have been hearing that we need more housing diversity and units available. This project is focused on some specific tools to encourage more housing to meet the current needs of our community. And as we consider housing, we're talking about a lot of different types of housing for our current community needs, including accessory dwelling units or ADUs, cottage courts, detached single-family homes, duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes, townhomes, and a variety of scales of multifamily buildings. So what is Growing MKE? Growing MKE is a citywide planning process about housing to advance housing choice and equity, fiscal sustainability and economic development, and environmental sustainability and resilience. There are two phases in this project. The first is a proposed update to the citywide policy plan, and it includes both policies and actions related to encouraging housing choice and growth, and also recommended updates to the city zoning code. The zoning code is the City of Milwaukee's rules for development. Then in phase 2, we're going to work on making those updates to the zoning code. Comprehensive planning in Milwaukee consists of a citywide policy plan that covers the entire geographic boundaries of the city, which is 96 square miles. We have 14 different comprehensive area plans in the city, and these plans work together to guide future development by setting a collective vision and roadmap for our future. And they're updated based on changing needs in the community. In Growing MKE, we're looking at how to support our current evolving housing needs citywide. And we aren't starting from scratch. The existing Milwaukee zoning code and comprehensive plan reflect community support for walkable neighborhoods, mixed-use housing and development, and housing choice. And we're bringing together the city's area plans, community goals, and the mayor's vision for economic prosperity together into one comprehensive planning document focused on housing citywide. Some of those recent planning efforts include the Climate and Equity Plan, the Collective Affordable Housing Strategic Plan, and some of our recent area plan updates, which I'm sure many of you have participated in. And we know that this particular project is just one piece of the puzzle in terms of Milwaukee's housing system and the strategies to address local housing needs. There are many pieces of the puzzle that the city, community partners, and various entities work on to help create a housing system for all Milwaukeeans. So what is zoning and why are we talking about it? Zoning is a written document of rules and a map that shows what zone each piece of land is part of. Each zone has a unique set of rules that guide development in terms of the type of use allowed and the shape of the buildings. And all of these rules are adopted by the city's Common Council. For GrowingMKE, we're not talking about changing any of the zones on the map. We're talking about updating some of the written rules that go along with each of those zones on the map. Milwaukee's zoning code gets updated over time. Milwaukee's first zoning code was created in 1920 when the city was much smaller in size. Some of the oldest areas of the city were built actually before the first zoning code, and those areas were built without rules and have some of the greatest diversity in housing types. Over time, we've adopted new zoning codes and made updates. Our current zoning code was adopted in 2002 with map changes across the city. Since then, we have made routine technical updates as needed. GrowingMKE was launched in mid-2023 to consider our goals for housing and zoning changes needed to reduce the barriers to creating housing that we want and need. What does zoning look like for housing right now in Milwaukee? Currently, 40% of parcels that allow housing only allow one housing unit. These are the newer areas of the city that became part of the city of Milwaukee in the 1950s and 1960s. Over half of our residentially zoned parcels allow for 2 or more units in the older parts of the city. In the areas in the darkest green of the middle map, zoning allows up to 4 housing units as long as the property is big enough. We are ahead of a lot of other cities in the country as we already allow multifamily housing in all commercial districts, corridors, and downtown. Another thing to know about development in Milwaukee is that we have by right development, which means any proposal that meets all the requirements within the zoning code can apply for a building permit. If a proposal does not meet the rules within the zoning code, the project goes through an additional review process. Why are we taking this project on now? And why are we looking at both policies in terms of our comprehensive plan and zoning at the same time? Milwaukee has a housing shortage now, and while Milwaukee is not currently rapidly growing, housing development has not kept up with demands based on our changing needs. Milwaukeeans are struggling to find housing of all types, sizes, and price points in this competitive environment, unfortunately. And recent statistics show that Milwaukee has the third most competitive rental market for multifamily buildings in the country. There are also 14 people applying for every apartment available currently, showing that we need more housing for our current population now. We also know we need more diversity in terms of our housing types and the sizes of our housing units to meet current resident needs. This dot chart here is a lot to take in, but you'll see Milwaukee in the upper left corner showing that it's had a lot of year-over-year growth in rental prices. And at the same time, there aren't enough new housing units for rent being built. And if you look at Austin, Texas, in the lower right of the chart, you'll see that they have not had a lot of year-over-year rental cost growth because they are building a lot more housing. When enough housing supply is being built, there is less competition amongst residents for the available housing, helping stabilize housing costs for residents. We also know that even though efforts to grow excuse me, we also know that even without efforts to grow the city's population, we're going to need more housing in the next 20 years for projected population growth due to climate change. We also have smaller household sizes now, which means we need more homes because there's fewer people living in each home. So we need to work together to grow our housing supply to meet our current needs. Some opportunities include allowing accessory dwelling units, which are not allowed right now. Examples of these include rear cottages, flats above garages, and converted attics. Allowing these will help provide gentle and incremental growth in our neighborhoods. And allowing more types of middle housing, the types of housing that fits within a walkable neighborhood, like townhomes, fourplexes, and clustered homes like cottage courts, can allow for more housing options gradually over time. It's a priority to advance equity through these zoning code updates. We have been learning from peer cities as well as best practices from the American Planning Association. Unfortunately, zoning has been used in the past to further issues with segregation, and it's important to now use zoning updates as a tool to dismantle these inequities. We also know that density and growth are economic decisions. In 1960, Milwaukee had 150,000 more people living in it. Based on this, we know we can easily accommodate at least 150,000 more within the city, given our existing infrastructure. When there are more people and housing, there are more households splitting the taxes, and this can help relieve some of the tax burden in the community, given the population loss and the many service cuts that we've experienced. Another objective of this project is to streamline the development rules to increase our pool of emerging local developers so that they can create new housing in neighborhoods they're familiar with and create the kind of homes that our community needs. Growing MKE is just one piece of the puzzle, but an important piece of Milwaukee's housing system puzzle because zoning code updates will help move forward many of the pieces of the housing puzzle, and by that meaning all the programs and strategies that many partners, including many of you here tonight, are working on. For instance, zoning code updates are one example of an anti-displacement strategy, allowing us to build housing to respond to current resident demand. Without additional housing, housing costs and displacement pressures in existing neighborhoods will continue to increase. This includes additional housing in higher income neighborhoods where there is a significant demand, so there isn't pressure on lower income neighborhoods where existing residents can be displaced. There are many important programs and initiatives that the city partners and other entities need to continue our collective work on. And these priorities include increasing and preserving Black and Latino home ownership in Milwaukee and creating and preserving affordable rental housing. And with that, I'll pass things to Amy.
Thank you. So the GrowingMKE planning process has been a collaborative process led by the City of Milwaukee Department of City Development, with support from a national consultant team of placemakers and DPC co-design. We also had support from a community engagement consultant earlier on in the process to extend our engagement and help meet people where they were. There was also a community advisory committee of 19 residents from across the city, a technical advisory committee of developers, architects, and housing advocates, and an internal team from multiple city departments. We are now in a fourth round of the process, which is additional engagement. We have a large city, and there are a lot of people that may be interested in this project. We launched the process in the summer of 2023, talking to people about the goals for housing in Milwaukee. Then there was outreach around draft recommendations in the plan in the late fall and winter of 2023. In the spring of 2024, we presented and had community engagement activities around the full draft plan. There was an initial public hearing for the updated proposed draft plan in July, and we heard from that round of engagement that community members would like to have more time to look at the plan, to understand it, address concerns, and provide feedback. So we are now in that additional round of engagement, and this webinar is part of that. After this period of engagement, we'll take the feedback gathered and identify potential updates to the plan. Another updated plan will be posted for review before an adoption process that includes 2 public hearings. There has been a significant amount of engagement that has informed the plan. Thank you to those who have already engaged and offer your feedback that's helped us get to this point, and please continue to help us let people know about the project. What we've heard. Through the planning process so far, we've heard that people are excited about the idea of growth. They want more affordability. They want great neighborhoods and quality of life. They're excited about the idea of housing diversity, having more variety of housing types within neighborhoods. They want to see great building design, sustainability, resilience, and connected transportation systems. So we took all of that feedback that we received to date, and we wrapped that into 5 overarching goals that relate to citywide goals: housing choice and equity, economic development, walkable and connected, sustainable and resilient, healthy and thriving. All of the policies within the plan and the zoning recommendations work towards trying to reach those goals. The policies are broken into 4 sections. The policies weave together the existing policies within the Housing and Neighborhoods chapter of the citywide plan, the Collective Affordable Housing Strategic Plan, and the Anti-Displacement Plan, along with the many conversations and policies around housing and other planning efforts over the last 10 years. The GrowingMKE plan will be a chapter in the citywide policy plan that applies to housing citywide. The policy section of the plan is about 10 pages, so I'm not going to run through it all, but it is available on the website in English, Spanish, and Hmong. These policies fall into the sections of increasing housing choice and access, social connections and health, walkable neighborhoods and transit-oriented development, and neighborhood development and urban design. So you may be wondering, what exactly is a policy? In planning, a policy is a guiding principle or statement that informs decisions about how land can be used. A policy may also guide future efforts to improve the physical, social, and economic conditions of the city. Policies are designed to support a community's overall goals in topics such as housing, economic development, and sustainability. However, policies are not regulations. They cannot create new or change existing programs, regulations, or funding for specific priorities on their own. For example, a policy might say, allow for accessory dwelling units in all neighborhoods. This policy would guide future zoning decisions and development approvals to allow for accessory dwelling units in more neighborhoods. The plan outlines next steps staff should take in implementing changes to the zoning code. I'm going to go over the main recommendations. There is also a full implementation chart in the plan that describes all the possible related updates staff will need to look at when any updates to the code are made. First, let's look at how to encourage more housing diversity in more neighborhoods. We're making 2 main recommendations. There's 2 parts of this recommendation for middle housing, the types of housing that blend into most neighborhoods because they're a similar scale. Recommendation 1A, in all residentially zoned areas, allow for single-family detached homes, accessory dwelling units, townhomes, duplexes, triplexes, and cottage courts. I'm going to go through these housing types in a little bit more detail. Single-family homes are a traditional housing type that we think of in terms of home ownership in Milwaukee. They come in many sizes. A smaller home can be a more affordable option, whereas a larger home can have more room for larger families, including extended family. Accessory dwelling units. We currently don't define these in our zoning code, so where you see them currently, they're either in historic use or they've went through a special approval process. Accessory dwelling units include the coach style with a unit above the garage, a detached accessory dwelling unit in the backyard, an internal ADU, which would be a converted attic or basement, or an attached ADU onto the primary home. These can work for a lot of different people, upsizing, downsizing, just starting out, and they can provide additional income for homeowners. Townhomes are basically attached single-family homes. These can be owned or rented, and they're often more affordable due to reduced land and utility and maintenance costs. duplexes and triplexes. These work for many household types, including first-time homeowners, one-person households, families, extended families, and those with aging parents. There's a potential also to support a mortgage with rental income, and they blend right into a lot of our existing neighborhoods. This is the second part of the recommendation to increase housing diversity within neighborhoods. So in the residential areas of the city where duplexes or other multifamily housing was historically allowed, now also allow for a fourplex. So essentially, where the zoning code currently allows for duplexes or more than that, allow for the housing types I just reviewed, plus fourplexes or up to 4 units on a property. So the idea with this set of recommendations is to allow for a little bit more density everywhere, allowing for a few more housing types. And from what we've seen from other cities that have implemented these types of zoning updates, it's an incremental approach with changes occurring over time. We already allow for some of these housing types in some neighborhoods, and they aren't getting built in large numbers. There are other factors at play into whether a home or housing type will get built, such as the cost of building materials and available financing. So how else do we encourage housing diversity in more areas of the city? The second main recommendation is to encourage more housing opportunities in multifamily and commercial zoning districts. Currently, in our downtown and in our commercial and multifamily districts, we have a mathematical equation that says, based on the size of this property, you can have this many housing units within that building. However, that mathematical equation does not explain how tall the building is going to be, or how wide that building is going to be, or where it sits on the lot. And we have those requirements too. So we're recommending to rely on the design standards, such as height and setback requirements, to determine the size of the building and have that control the number of units within the building. So removing the mathematical equation. The idea here is that this change will make it a lot clearer what can be built, and it sets those design standards for how people interact with the outside of the building and how the building relates to the surrounding environment. So how do we make sure new development supports walkable neighborhoods? With all of this, we want to make sure we're updating our design standards for multifamily buildings to ensure that we have nice facades, windows that help create a safer walkable environment with eyes on the street, composition, the building that fits in nicely with the surrounding context, building width so that we don't have a huge building covering the whole block, and making sure that parking structures don't cause huge blank walls, which would create an environment that isn't nice to walk in. So there has been some confusion throughout this process, and we've realized that some more engagement tools were needed to talk through what the plan is and what it's not, and just describe the changes in more detail. So this set of bullet points is one of the things we've been working on, and to explain what the plan does do. I'm going to go through a few of the other tools that we've developed and what we're working on in a minute. So, this plan update does update the city's comprehensive plan, which is a basic set of guiding documents to help inform future decisions. The plan does acknowledge the fundamental role of zoning in creating historic inequities and segregation. It does provide a citywide framework for equitable long-term growth without displacement. It does include policies that promote home ownership and affordable rental options in all neighborhoods. And it does include recommendations for future zoning reforms that could increase housing options and reduce housing costs, while also retaining the character of existing neighborhoods. However, the plan does not modify any existing program or regulation or propose any specific development project. The plan does not influence zoning or land decisions in place outside of the city of Milwaukee. We only have jurisdiction over the city of Milwaukee, so this does not apply to any municipalities in Milwaukee County. It does not solve the affordability crisis or directly set the price of new and existing homes. It does not propose specific program design details for the housing financing strategies needed to solve all the pieces of the affordable housing program or puzzle, the one that we showed on the earlier slide, but we do recognize the importance of continuing to work on those pieces. The plan does not discourage the development of new detached single-family homes, and it does not encourage development of larger multifamily buildings in 1- and 2-family residential neighborhoods. As I mentioned, there was initial public hearing asking for more time for engagement. Some of the questions raised in the hearing and through public comments made it clear that some additional communication materials were needed. So since then, we've been doing some small scale community engagement and meeting directly with neighborhood groups, and we'll continue to do so. We're also working on scheduling a couple open house style public meetings in December, which I'll share more information on in a few minutes. We're holding these webinars to help bring people up to date, and we'll be posting recordings for those who can't make it. We're also working on a benefit and harm analysis. One of the requests that came out of the public hearing in July was to document who would benefit and who could be harmed from these recommendations and changes. There are many factors that we considered and researched during the process to develop the recommendations, and we've been going through and writing that all out. Part of this document also includes information on the data that we'll be tracking to monitor changes and new development and impacts. So if it turns out that any of these changes lead to unintended negative consequences, we can always make more updates. We've also been working on graphic and website updates. So I'm going to jump over to our website now and show you some of the resources we've been working on. So, all right. So here is the main website. Go to engagemilwaukee.gov/growingmke. You go here, you can click on resources. And here you'll see a few new resources. And I just want to note that if you want to see this in another language, you can use this drop down at the top. So at this first link, you have current and proposed zoning future information. And I've preloaded the page over here, hopefully. So this page, which is loading, has a map, and it contains, you can zoom in to a part of the city and it will load. And let's just pick one here. And you can click on any property. Give it a minute. All right, so we picked this one. And it says the address of the property. You can also search and enter a intersection. So this one says RT4, that's the current zoning district. You click on the drop down for RT4 and you can find out what the zoning currently allows and then what GrowingMKE recommends allowing. So you can do that with any property in the city that has a zoning district that allows housing. So going back to the resources tab, this is the graphic representation of Milwaukee's housing puzzle, an example of what housing diversity looks like on a typical Milwaukee block. We added a couple of videos from external resources. So this is a video that talks about zoning and equity. There's been some questions about taxes and assessments. So there's some more information here as well. We added this timeline that talks about Milwaukee's zoning and development history. You can also find this information within the plan document. We'll be uploading the benefit and harm analysis and any other communication materials that we continue to develop as part of the outreach process. Going back to the main page, you can look at the proposed plan at this link. So the proposed plan is here. You can submit comments here. We have the policy sections in both Spanish and Hmong, along with the executive summary as well. And we're going to be putting any boards from the upcoming public meetings on this page too. So I'm going to go back to the presentation. All right. So in addition to the webinars, we'll have 2 open houses in December. The open house setup provides us a way to present a lot of information in interactive ways with several staff available to answer questions. We're close to confirming the date for a meeting at Pulaski High School in their cafeteria. And we have confirmed that we'll be able to hold a meeting at the Wisconsin Black Historic Society and Museum on Thursday, December 12th from 5 to 7 p.m. We will have a Spanish translator available for the meeting at Pulaski High School, along with boards in Spanish. We'll also have packets of the boards in Spanish and Hmong at both of the meetings. So if you also can't join us for one of those dates or know somebody that cannot and would like to, we'll be putting the boards from the open houses online as well. So with that, we're going to move over to question and answer.
Thank you, Amy and Tanya, and thanks to everyone who put questions in the chat. we'll do our best to get to all those questions, and then once we run out of the ones in the chat, we can the staff can stick around also to talk after the fact if people want to ask other questions that are easier to do verbally. But we'll start with everything that was in the chat. The first question, I'll do our best to take them in order, was that, well, there was a couple people that asked about Milwaukee's legacy of redlining and segregation and how Growing MKE, the planning document, addresses that. I know you touched on that a little bit in the presentation after those questions got asked, but do you want to talk about that a little more?
Yeah, so within the plan, we specifically called out that history within that timeline. So it's on the website and within those pages of the plan to kind of talk through that. Also calling out equity. So we very much acknowledge, and if there are things that you feel like we've left out of the plan, please do let us know. Do take a look.
So yeah, if people want the longer version of that, yeah, there is a timeline online, and we've certainly acknowledged the way that the zoning code has been in the past been used as a tool of segregation, and some of the recommendations in Growing MKE are directly related to acknowledging and mitigating those past tools, which had limited housing choices in certain parts of the city that did closely align with a lot of the redlining maps that got mentioned earlier. There was another question about repair versus new construction. I think the question was, to what degree does the plan also support repairing existing housing stock? I guess I'll talk about that, because there was a couple of comments as well that touched on that topic, aligned around the fact that there are a lot of homes right now that are unlivable because they've been left vacant and deteriorating, often after foreclosure. And obviously the city is very focused on bringing those homes back to productive occupancy as well. We have designed a lot of our funding programs to help individuals who want to live in and occupy those homes, rehabilitate them. I think one of our largest investments of our federal ARPA funding was in the Homes MKE program, which had the goal of rehabilitating formerly vacant and abandoned homes that came into city ownership for affordable home ownership and lease to own models. And so that remains a priority for all of the city's housing, many of the city's housing financing tools. We know that many of those homes cost more to fix up than would make them affordable. And so we're working to use our financing tools to fill those gaps. And so that's certainly part of the city's overall housing strategy. Absolutely. Another question was, provide examples of how the plan attempts to address past and current racial inequity.
Can you repeat the question?
So yeah, please provide examples of how the plan addresses past and current racial inequity.
So zoning is one tool in which we can work on redressing historical inequities. And as Sam mentioned, the zoning and the housing types and things like that over time have really matched, excluding certain housing types, and in that way related to the redlining districts. And so this is one way, expanding housing diversity, that we can look at increasing access to housing across the city. But as that graphic shows, the housing puzzle, there are many other pieces to that puzzle in terms of how to work at redressing segregation and inequities in the city that we continue to work on to make sure that everyone has the housing that meets their needs.
I think I'd like to just add that in addition to zoning changes, there are also policies that, address opportunities for us to continue repairing our existing neighborhoods that have experienced those inequities, in addition to kind of the greater flexibility to build housing that better serves community needs as we do infill development, some of those neighborhoods with open land, for instance.
There was a question about population growth and the difference between the fact that there was a slide that referenced that our population used to be roughly 150,000 people higher, and then also I think the question was asking about how that compares to the mayor's overall goals for population growth. I can answer that one. The as was noted in the presentation, yeah, Milwaukee used to have about 150,000 more people. And so what that means is that we have an infrastructure network, a park system, a school system that was designed to accommodate a larger population. And as the population has shrunk, it's resulted in existing residents and households having to share a larger burden of the tax base in maintaining that infrastructure. And so we do see that there's room for growth, and that can be in both in vacant lots and neighborhoods that were built to accommodate additional people. The mayor obviously has talked about his overall goal to grow the population, but the focus of the plan is to meet the housing needs of both our current residents, to ensure that there's housing choice that meets all of Milwaukee's current residents, as well as that we're providing options across a variety of price points to serve families and households across a variety of life cycles. And so that's the overarching goal of the majority of the recommendations in the plan. There was a few questions that were all kind of generally aligned around the state of the city's, the properties that the city's owns due to foreclosure and that are often boarded up, as well as properties that private ownership has that are boarded up and vacant. And obviously that is a key focus of our department and our colleagues in the Department of Neighborhood Services. There are code enforcement actions that are taking place every day, where our Department of Neighborhood Services looks to ensure that people, private owners who have homes that are not up to code, are making those repairs. And that's nothing is proposed to change. And GrowingMKE continues to support the code enforcement to make sure that everyone is responsible for maintaining their properties up to code, especially to make sure that there's not negative impacts that vacant properties are having on neighborhoods, and that anyone who's living in a home has a right to a safe and decent home, and that bad landlords are being held accountable. And so that's something that currently exists in the codes, and there's nothing in GrowingMKE would weaken any of those requirements. And as I mentioned earlier, we also continue to utilize the tools in the city's financial toolbox to try to assist with homeowners and small developers to repair those homes, recognizing that those costs often exceed what anyone can pull off on an individual budget. There was a question about provide some examples of affordable housing. And there was a note about the challenge that especially our lowest income households in Milwaukee have accessing affordable housing. That I think we certainly agree with that sentiment and that comment and that feedback. As the city has developed our overall collective affordable housing plan, we've done a fair amount of data analysis that came to the same conclusion that you all know through talking to neighbors, lived experience, etc., that the people who have the hardest time accessing safe and decent housing in Milwaukee are our lowest income residents. The data suggests that individuals with jobs paying $15 an hour or less are having have the most difficult time finding safe and affordable housing on the market currently. And that's why the city has made a core priority of our financial tools to subsidize and provide incentives to developers or home builders or small developers who are building housing that are affordable to that households and families and individuals in those income ranges. We know that zoning code changes and private market development on our own will not serve those individuals, and that's why we need to continue to work with both the city's tools, our state partners, and our federal partners to provide funding to create deeply affordable housing. And that's a core part of the city's housing strategy. We have a goal of creating over 30,000 units that are affordable to families making $15 an hour or less over the next 10 years. And that's a huge component of our overall housing strategy. And some of the types of housing that would be enabled by GrowingMKE in our multifamily districts and our zoning corridors, when combined with those financing tools, can deliver those types of housing options. There was another question about with new accessory dwelling units, how are electric and water separated? Can they be separated when new ADUs are built? What is the cost of new ADUs? I'll try to take those one by one. So yes, we shouldn't use the ADU accessory dwelling unit can mean a couple things. It can be a detached structure like a rear apartment, cottage apartment, some people call them. It can also mean a new addition in a basement or attic. And so when a new ADU is constructed outside the individual home, like a rear house or a garage house, there, yes, generally it is served by a separate water service. So that was one of the questions. We know that does add cost in some cases, and other jurisdictions have looked if there's ways to reduce those costs. But in general, in Milwaukee right now, Those units would have to be served by separate water. So that was that question. The cost of an accessory dwelling unit, that differs significantly depending on if it is going to be an external structure or an internal one. We know that it's generally the cheapest style, the most the style that has the least cost is for someone to kind of convert an unused space, a basement, an attic, to create a new living space that they can rent to a family, a friend, a colleague. Those are generally cheaper than creating a standalone garage or rear apartment. We know that those continue to have construction costs in the $150 to $200 per square foot range if they're a new external accessory dwelling unit. There was a couple of questions about the benefit and harm analysis, including what's the status, what will it include, will it be unbiased? Amy or Tanya, do you want to just talk about that in a little more depth?
Oh, I'll go for it. So the benefit and harm analysis starts off, it's currently in a draft form, so we're working on it, and we will be posting that and are very much welcome to public feedback on it as well. So we'll be transparent with that. As we mentioned during the presentation, it's a lot of the considerations that we've been taking into account as we've gone through the process, and we totally are glad that it was asked of us. We're happy to get it on paper. So it goes through what we currently allow within our zoning code, what the harms and potential benefit, would be of keeping things the same. And then it goes through a lot of the questions that people asked about displacement and home ownership, historic preservation. I'm trying to remember the other ones I should have it up. What repairs? Thank you. In terms of also talking about who might benefit from the changes, who would not. And basically also really demonstrating the data that we're going to be tracking to make sure that there aren't any unintended consequences, because we know that we can also change things to make sure that we're mitigating any harms. And also acknowledging that there are all these other pieces to the puzzle that will help us then mitigate things or help complement this work on the zoning code.
The next question was about who has been able to receive support through the city's various anti-displacement efforts. So for those that are not aware, in 2018, the city created an anti-displacement plan with a goal of identifying policies and programs that would help existing both homeowners and residents remain in their neighborhoods, especially as we saw potential for price increases caused by new development. So that plan was prepared in 2018. Since then, the city and our partners, and a lot of this has been led by our colleagues on the Common Council, have created a variety of programs to support homeownership retention and homeowners acquisition for residents. And we've targeted all of those programs to areas that are at risk of displacement. And so from some of the specific numbers, in 2021, the city launched a down payment assistance program that was targeted to families within the city's community development block grant area, as well as in the surrounding neighborhoods. And since then, that program has helped more than 900 homeowners. It's deployed $5.5 million to assist homeowners achieve homeownership. 98% of those program participants have been homeowners of color. Also, since the release of the anti-displacement plan in 2018, more than $7 million has been deployed to assist more than 400 Milwaukee homeowners, existing homeowners, make repairs to their homes for middle and moderate homeowners. The Milwaukee United, which is a coalition made up of a number of philanthropic groups led by the Greater Milwaukee Committee, Greater Milwaukee Foundation, launched an anti-displacement fund in 2019 that helped more than 100 long-term homeowners, low and moderate income, in neighborhoods directly north and south of downtown, which were the neighborhoods that were identified as having seen the most significant increases in property taxes due to new development. And that's a program that basically has provided support to help those individuals with increasing taxes. That program is not being administered by the city, but the operators of that program have pledged to continue it for a number of years. The city has also developed a tax increment financing for affordable housing policy in 2018, focusing that new development in areas that were at risk of displacement. And that policy has resulted in the creation of 976 new affordable housing units, with either in development or in the pipeline, including reserving 200 for existing residents of the neighborhood that they're located in that could be at risk of displacement. We've also implemented policies that will prioritize, when we have city-owned land in areas that are at risk of displacement, prioritizing affordable housing on those parcels And we've had recent success of multiple new developments that were mixed income or affordable housing, again, with priority for existing neighborhood residents in neighborhoods that were risk of displacement, as well as working on with local developers and Habitat for Humanity create new entry-level starter homes in neighborhoods generally in the vicinity of downtown. And so those are a variety of the anti-displacement strategies that are underway and continue to be underway. And we know that we also we want to continue to make sure that we're building our anti-displacement plan and making it more robust. And so over the coming years or coming months, we're committed to working with community partners on the updated homeowners and future homeowners Bill of Rights, which will supplement the existing anti-displacement plan with additional anti-displacement strategies that we look forward to working on. And GrowingMKE fits into that because we also are aware from watching what's happening across the country and in other cities and seeing research that if the zoning code is a barrier to the construction of new housing, especially in neighborhoods that are seeing market demand, the result will be is displacement pressures moving into other neighborhoods. And so if we're not allowing new development to happen in those neighborhoods that where the zoning code might be limiting it, especially if it was caused by past policies that limited where multifamily housing can be built, we know that that will have pressure and result in increasing displacement pressure in neighborhoods, including neighborhoods historically of color. And so that's how some of the zoning changes recommended by GrowingMKE also fit into that larger anti-displacement strategy. The next question was about the process for approving new developments. If GrowingMKE is approved, will it change the process for approving developments? I can answer that one. No, it wouldn't. Right now, just as the process is now, if somebody proposes something that meets the zoning code, they don't need that project can move forward. But if someone's proposing something that doesn't meet any of the requirements of the zoning code or needs a zoning change, they would have to go to the Board of Zoning Appeals or the Common Council to seek approval for those developments. And so that is how the process currently works, and nothing is proposed to change about that through GrowingMKE. So I will take the next question. We already answered that one. How does the plan address housing needs for fellow humans that are currently unhoused? Amy, do you want to take that one?
So within the policy section of the plan, there is a section about continuing to support programs for the unhoused. Creating more housing in general creates more supply. And so the types of housing that we're talking about, whether it's apartments or permanently supportive, the idea is to make this easier for all development and clear too. So we think of permanently supportive housing, that apartment type building is the same kind of apartment building, that would be built for anybody else too. So it's all this making it easier process and a clearer process for all development. But yeah, there's policies to continue having the city and working with the county to support those that are unhoused.
Similar question about how does the plan address or support individuals who are returning from incarceration, given that they also face specific barriers to securing housing? And I can take that one. That's a specific feedback that we have heard, and I think we've heard that in a few different meetings that's a concern or something that people would like us to explore further. And so I think that is something we're working on. And for the person who asked that question, we'd love to talk to you a little bit more further about specific policy language that you think is appropriate, because I do think that that's an area that when we release the updated GrowingMKE plan, we would like to include some additional language on, because we've heard that a few different times. And I think there's some it's definitely something we want to include. And so that's something that I think you will see addressed more explicitly in the next version of the plan, and happy to talk a little bit more with you or with anyone else who wants to talk about that, about what that language could look like. There was a couple more questions about redlining. Yeah, I think that's been addressed, but if they came in more recently, I think what I can do to answer, how does the plan acknowledge and address redlining? So obviously, when you look at, sorry, I shouldn't say it. Some of the redlining maps that were created by the Federal Home Loan, I'm sorry, I'm blanking on the acronym, but the group, the Federal Home Loan Corporation in the 1930s that created the redlining maps that, and with some supplementary maps that influenced where lenders did or didn't lend and where certain federal investments were made. Those did align somewhat closely with some of our local zoning maps. It's not a one-to-one relationship, but many of the areas that were redlined or that were not redlined were the areas that had prohibitive zoning that didn't allow certain types of housing. And one of the recommendations of GrowingMKE is to now allow those kinds of housing in those areas that were formerly exclusionary. And so there is some direct ties back to some of those historic maps when you certainly look in the archives. And we can, if anyone wants to dive more in depth in that topic, that's something we're also happy to talk about in a larger session, because there's a lot of history there. And we've tried to certainly explore the city's zoning history and align it to some of the segregationist policies that were occurring at different points in the city's history. And we've put together a timeline on that that's in the plan. And again, happy to talk about that in more depth if anyone would like to do that offline. There's a question about, can you create an interactive map for the targeted areas for development? The answer to that one is there is no specific. GrowingMKE does not propose specific new areas for development. What it does is it recommends making tweaks to zoning districts across the city to allow slightly more housing within all of those zoning districts. The areas, as Amy mentioned earlier, areas that are currently zoned for single family homes only would if the recommendations are adopted, allow duplexes and triplexes, and that would be changes that would happen throughout the city. Areas that are currently allowed for multifamily or commercial zoning districts would also allow for generally additional units, but it would not change the zoning map. So it would allow for gradual density in all of the parts of the city, but it would not explicitly target any specific area of the city for significantly different kinds of development that are already allowed. Do you consider housing a human right? Yeah, so I think the one of the things that drives the city's collective affordable housing strategic plan is the overarching goal that every Milwaukeean has a safe, decent, and accessible home. And so what that means is that the city is committed to using all the tools at our disposal to make sure that every Milwaukeean has a place. And that's there's different ways we do that. And for the people who are most housing vulnerable and have the most challenges accessing housing, we know that zoning is not the solution to that problem. It's supporting deeply affordable housing. It's supporting transitional housing and permanent supportive housing. And those are the things that we utilize all of the funds that we have at our disposal through different federal programs to support those kinds of uses. And we advocate for more of those resources at the state and federal level. So absolutely, the city's policy is that we want every Milwaukee resident to have safe and accessible housing. Sorry, you may be hearing fireworks in the background. That's there's some fireworks downtown. Still going through the plans, trying to make sure. We see there's a lot of comments in the chat also. We're taking notes of those, so I'm trying to go through to make sure we're also getting the questions.
The question about only allowing an hour, we wanted to make sure that people knew that we will stick around for as long as there's questions. We're totally fine with that, but we didn't want to make it seem overwhelming or make it seem like the presentation was an hour and a half. So we'll stick around.
And this is just one part of many engagement opportunities during this round of engagement.
So that's a good point. I mean, I think we will stick around and we'll continue to answer the questions in the chat. And then again, we made a commitment that if people want to stick around and have even a little bit of dialogue, we'll do that. But for those who did just want to attend for the hour that we noticed the meeting for, Tanya and Amy, do you want to just give a little bit of kind of closing comments about what people can expect next and next steps? And then again, anyone who wants, the staff are going to stay on and continue to answer all the questions in the chat as well.
Yeah, so I will add anybody that isn't on the email list that registered for this webinar with an email address to that list. And so as soon as the recordings are ready and posted online, I will send out an email notification letting you all know that they are online. And then we are preparing again for those open houses, and with that e-notify, I expect to have confirmation from Pulaski High School any day now, that we will be able to have that open house that week as well. So stay tuned. We'll be getting that information out, and we'll continue to reach out with questions, comments anytime. We are here to continue to talk about the plan. And as Sam mentioned, we want to hear feedback. We are open to updates and things like that. So with that, you can move on to some more questions.
Yeah, thank you. There was a couple questions about basement accessory dwelling units. If I'm trying to group them all together. One of the questions was, I think, will they be allowed? Yes. I mean, the GrowingMKE does recommend allowing basement accessory dwelling units. There was a question about if I understood it correctly, will new homes be required to have tall enough basements that would allow for future conversions? That's not something that the plan currently recommends, to add a new requirement for minimum basement heights, but that's an interesting idea. It's something I think we can think about. But right now, the zoning code doesn't require basements at all. What will be the requirements to have a basement apartment? So I think that will just boil down to if the recommendations in GrowingMKE are passed to allow accessory dwelling units, then you would just have to meet the building code. And there are certain types of housing that are easier than others to convert for basement apartments, depending on if there's windows that can be a means of egress. But the GrowingMKE plan wouldn't change the building code requirements. So if it would reduce the zoning code barriers, and then if someone was able to add a basement apartment that met the building code, that would be legal. Okay.
There was a couple of conversations about related to historic districts. So the historic district in the city of Milwaukee, the match up with the zoning code. So the zoning code is the underlying, and then sometimes the historic districts have additional requirements, especially the local districts. So those historic district guidelines would continue to apply, but the zoning code also applies to those areas.
The next question was about how does one learn about the programs that are available to help existing homeowners repair their homes? We will put a link in the chat, but if you go to the city website, the city of Milwaukee, city.milwaukee.gov/NIDC, that is a good starting point to find a lot of our housing resources, and we can put a link to that in the chat. There's a question that says, if we're incentivizing developers to create rentals, how will we ensure those developments stay affordable? The answer to that one is that any development that gets financing from the city for affordable housing, we do sign development agreements with them that do mandate the terms of that affordability, how long it has to be affordable, the specific affordability levels, and so that there's a legal requirement that those requirements are met. There was a question about, well, let me. How long will it take for the tax burden to be reduced? So I think that question is about the note that was said earlier, that one of the ways that overall the city has to raise additional resources and to reduce the tax burden on existing residents is through new development. And so the question was, how long will it take for those any reduction to occur? And that depends on the pace of new development. And obviously, it would be something that would be slow and gradual over time, depending on new development that occurs. But it is probably worth noting that one of the things that we've heard loudest throughout a lot of the recent engagement, both on GrowingMKE and other things, is people's concern about the overall increasing tax burden on all residents in the city. And the only ways that the city has to reduce that tax burden are through either cutting or reducing services or growing the tax base. And so one way to help alleviate some of that burden is by bringing in new development that will help spread out the existing costs of city services across a wider number of taxpayers. There's been a few questions just about in general about holding holding slumlords or bad landlords accountable, absolutely agree with that. That's been a commitment of all city departments to hold bad landlords accountable through code compliant, through code enforcement. I think there was some dialogue in the chat about the fact that the state government has passed certain rules over the past few years that limited the city's ability to do that. The city over different periods of time passed a number of pieces of legislation that would increase penalties, increase inspections, increase different accountability measures on landlords and a number of those then were preempted by the state. So the state has basically taken away the city's power to regulate landlords in some of the ways that we would like. And so that's a long-term legislative advocacy action, absolutely, that the city has always attempted to advance, is to figure out ways to get some of our ability back at the local level to do even more than we're currently doing to hold landlords accountable. And we certainly will need help from our state representatives to do that. What policy can be included to discourage a saturation of tax credit housing in neighborhoods? So I think for those who don't know all the terminology, I think that question is about the fact that one of the main sources of affordable housing in the city is financed through the low-income housing tax credit program that is run by the state. And the city often gets involved in also being asked to financially support those developments. And we certainly do work with local neighbors, elected officials, and alders to try to make sure that we're being thoughtful in where those developments are located. And we know that that's a topic that there's a lot of different opinions on. And again, happy to always continue to talk about that. But there's certainly a goal of ensuring that we're having a balanced location of where affordable housing is located. That's one of the recommendations in the anti-displacement plan that we've actually been somewhat successful in implementing, is targeting the areas that we're supporting affordable housing and using the city resources to support affordable housing in areas that are seeing those increased pressures for gentrification and displacement. So that is a explicit policy of the city. And it's, again, something we're always continuing to work on with our elected officials about how to ensure that we're being balanced in where we're delivering affordable housing. There's a question again about the page number of the zoning history. I think, yeah, if someone, maybe Kyle, if you have the plan open, if you could put the page number in about where
it's somewhere else in the chat. It has been added in.
Okay.
So
16 and 17.
there, thank you.
What impact will diverse housing have on single family homeowners? Tanya, do you want to take that one?
What impact will multifamily housing have
Or
on single family homeowners?
diverse, yeah. What impact will diverse housing? I assume that by diverse housing they mean diverse types of housing, but
Sure, yeah. Well, many of our neighborhoods in Milwaukee have a diversity of housing types already. So it is not uncommon for many of our neighborhoods to have a single family home next to 4 units of housing next to a duplex. And so we don't see any changes as it allows, say, a new development on an infill lot to be a negative impact on any one neighborhood or single family home for that matter. We believe having those housing choices and a variety of housing types for a mix of needs on a neighborhood level is a positive thing, and we have a lot of that in Milwaukee, and we see that as an asset. And that's something that came through in the many months of community engagement, and that people like that we have mixed and diverse housing in many of our Milwaukee neighborhoods, and continuing to allow that and encouraging that in other areas of the city when new housing is developed is an exciting idea. For instance, townhomes gets brought up a lot because townhomes are less maintenance for a lot of folks, but can still have that front door, maybe have a small yard space in the front or the back. and can be rental or home ownership. And so that's just one example of a housing type that we really don't have very much of in Milwaukee at all. There are some recent examples and some really old examples, but they're very challenging to build right now. And so there's a lot of excitement about that housing type. Back cottages is another example. They are actually illegal in this city right now, and there's a lot of interest and excitement around the idea of allowing them again because they are in a lot of our neighborhoods already, and are a positive asset to our neighborhoods. So
I just want to ask you to dig a little deeper into that. As far as the different size units next to a single family house, in the zoning code, isn't it a change to lot size?
Explain a
That
little bit
they,
more about what you mean, Danelle, so we can, I
isn't
want
it
to be
being
sure.
isn't it, excuse me, because I'm a little hoarse from an allergy, but isn't it a recommendation of the change in lot size?
Oh, I think I may know what you're asking. So the plan talks about, there are some parts of the city, especially kind of on the farther out areas, that we have very large minimum lot sizes, which means you couldn't, that if you want to build a new house, you have to have enough land for, 10 or 12 or 15,000 square feet. And so the plan does recommend reducing that minimum lot size. The lot sizes in the kind of closer in parts of the city that were built historically already have very low minimum lot sizes. So those changes would not likely um, meaningfully affect those parts of the city. I think that recommendation is more geared towards the really far outline areas where, again, to be allowed to build a house, you have to have a very large tract of land, and that often can drive up costs and be exclusionary.
Now, what I'm trying to get to is wasn't the recommendations that these larger structures would be able to be built on a lot size that was intended for a single family home?
So the recommendations, I'm not, again, I don't, the, right now, much of the city, our most common zoning district is the RT4 zoning district, which does allow up to 4 units. And that is also the zoning district that has the smallest lot sizes, minimum lot sizes. So I don't think there's not a plan to somehow reduce the lot sizes in the areas that are already the smallest. If I'm understanding the question, or to say the yeah, I don't know if I'm fully understanding the question, because no, right now the areas that have larger lot sizes are also generally often areas that only allow single family zoning. And so the plan is actually to undo some of that that challenge that you, I think, are addressing there.
And a lot of what we'll be looking at in phase 2 while we're working on those code updates is doing something called test fits, where we're seeing, okay, this is the idea of how much housing does it actually fit on this site, and making sure that the lot sizes are appropriate. We have differing lot sizes just within our 2 family districts, where like RT2 is like double the lot size as RT4. So there's things that we want to look at to make sure that there is more diversity in housing. And so even within our 2 family districts, you could get maybe 2 lots with single family homes on them. One thing that is good to know about our zoning districts is when our last zoning code was put into place, kind of was based on an average of what existed on that block. So if you're in a 2 family district, it's because there was more duplexes in that area. If you're in a single family, it's because there were more single family. That doesn't mean that there aren't already a mix of housing types within these neighborhoods. They're just legal and non-conforming. So it's more about having more diversity be allowed everywhere.
The next question is, what safeguards are there for current residents whose housing is different from what's being built now? Will they have to bring up their houses to code? There's no requirements that would require anybody who has an existing house to change it. They would have to follow the same building code we talked about earlier, as far as, keeping houses up to code that already apply. But no, there'd be no new requirements on existing homeowners. Talk.
I have a
There's a
question.
question about, yeah, if If I just want to make sure we get through, we were happy to kind of talk to people. I want to make sure we get through the written ones in the chat first, just to be fair to those people. And then, yeah, we're definitely happy to take questions after that. One of the questions was about reducing the police budget. That's a city council decision, but one thing that does restrict the council's ability to reduce the police budget is that the state has passed a law that has a minimum staffing standards for the police. That's another way that the state has limited our local control and taken away some of our abilities to manage our own affairs. But for better, it is the current status that the state has passed a law that says the city has to have a certain number of sworn police and fire at any given time. And so that does kind of tie the hands of our elected officials. Are these efforts going to increase or lower the water usage charges for homeowners? There's no specific elements of the plan that would change water costs. I mean, the water costs get driven by a lot of factors, but I don't think they wouldn't be directly tied to zoning. There was a question that got moved back up. I'm not sure. So Melody, I mean, you said you put it back up. I'm not sure I fully understand what the question is. I think it was a statement, but I'll do my best to answer it. It says,
I can ask.
oh yeah, go for it. Yes, go
So
for it.
I know that you all keep saying that you legally, have no rights over, holding landlords accountable. In my community, what I have seen is that oftentimes if somebody has a house that's a nuisance, there's a process and the city ends up taking that house. When an elder is on a fixed income and has no money to keep those taxes paid or keep up with the code violations, eventually their house is took. What I have seen in my community is that these LLCs, these out-of-state landlords and investors can have properties with 1 million code violations, 1 million tickets that they're not paying, sit for 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, and the city is not taking on those properties. For one, the excuse is we can't afford to take it on, but my community can't afford to let them sit and rot. So the same strategies that y'all use for people that are struggling and poor needs to be applied to these landlords. So I don't want to keep hearing y'all say that y'all can't do anything, because my community is a product of what y'all can do when it's people.
So thank you. No, I think I understand the question better now. And the city's practices and policies around tax foreclosure do not prioritize investor owners at all. Investor owners are subject to those same rules. If they're not paying taxes, they're subject to the tax foreclosure process. If they're not keeping up with code violations, they're subject to the same. And in fact, often they end up the ones most frequently in the reinspection process. I certainly agree with you that there's bad landlords out there who find ways to skirt the process, but the process is the same for landlords, and some of them, I think you're right, just make decisions to pay those fees. When you asked about what the city's doing to help homeowners stay out of that trap, the one thing that we've done historically is, because of some of those exact concerns, created multiple new programs to provide forgivable loans and grants for existing low-income residents to make needed repairs. So both the code compliance loan program and the strong homes loan program were created for that exact reason. They're only available to homeowners, and they're only available to lower income homeowners for those exact reasons. And so that we're not providing any type of those resources for small investors or small landlords. They're specifically limited to existing homeowners to help them make repairs. And especially with the code compliance loan program for low income seniors, they end up not having to pay those funds back. Another question just about kind of next steps around outreach and the different types of outreach, and then eventually when the plan will potentially come back for public approval. I think we maybe, Tanya, maybe I think you talked a little bit about some of the other upcoming outreach, but you can maybe talk beyond that again about what happens after that.
Yeah, I think we're a little bit flexible at this moment in terms of the outreach, because we do want to make sure that we're reaching everyone that wants to get talked to, because I know there's quite a few community groups that were interested in some neighborhood meetings, but are also interested in maybe coming to the open houses. So exact timeline, we don't have that right now, but once we finish this round of additional engagement, we plan on making some updates to the plan, posting that again for public comment, having likely another webinar, you know, to familiarize anybody with any changes that are made. And then moving that through a public hearing adoption process. So this is not going to be a brand new plan tomorrow. We still have some time left and are still looking for folks to engage and let us know what they think is missing from the plan.
And
If I
one
can,
thing,
that's part of my question on there in terms of outreach. Because there are outreaches, it's only, as I mentioned, the Tequity, there are people who don't have technology in the city. It is very technologically deficient in the area. There aren't access to libraries where people can read or see these things. There aren't big announcements on the television. A lot of things come through e-notify or email. So a big portion of the population is not getting information, neither are they able to give input. So in terms of that, the city and the county and everyone else who's involved in all of this, pushing forth these funds in this developmental plan, what specific measures, even if it includes knocking on the doors, are you doing to make sure that there are more than the 2,000 people that have been reached thus far when we have a population of 500,000?
so the one specific thing I could say that beyond what's already been said is that in addition to some of the citywide efforts we've talked about, the in-person open houses that are coming up, we've also been reaching out directly to individual neighborhood associations. And you should, if your neighborhood association would like an individual meeting, you have our contact information. Definitely reach out. We're happy to figure out a way to have us, whether it's an in-person meeting, a virtual meeting, come into one of your existing meetings, whatever makes the most sense for your neighborhood group, please let us know. And we're definitely happy to talk about what that looks like for you and your neighborhood association.
So in addition to that, with that, then that's why we're asking about the timeline and reaching out, because as I believe someone already mentioned, there are areas that do not have transportation. So even if there is an association, that area may not have individuals who can be reached by transportation. So what is the plan in terms of reaching a larger population when the population that you're talking to may be some of the same exact individuals and associations?
Yeah, I think we're trying to use as many tools as possible, and so yeah, happy to talk more about. I mean, I know you, and I know you're. I believe you represent 5 Points, and yeah, we've done meetings in the past in 5 Points, and are happy to figure out a way to do that. So please feel free to reach out.
That's correct. Thank you.
Um,
Can y'all tell us a little bit more about the 19 resident? Is it a committee that you all are working with?
yeah, I can. Oh, go ahead, Amy. Sorry.
Okay, the 19, they met 3 times during the planning process. I reached out to, I think, 26 different groups, and 19 people took me up on it. And they kind of helped us, give some feedback on initial outreach materials and things like that and help us get the word out. But it wasn't meant to, they're not a decision-making committee. They just were offering feedback, especially with how our communication materials and things like that, and housing is very, very complex. So they met 3 times and were given a stipend. There's no plans for them to meet again at this point. Just they're involved in terms of being knowledgeable on the process going forward and still in the loop and being able to attend events and things like that.
Amy, how is the feedback from this session and yesterday's session and the 2 upcoming sessions be incorporated in the final version of the plan? Are you all just listening to concerns, or are you all taking this feedback and really doing some changes to the zoning policies that is currently in that plan? As you know, we just Midtown and Metcalf and other community members have been really studying this plan. And there is a lot of things that we know will be harmful and that needs to be changed. So my question is this just a check the box saying that we engaged after we push y'all to engage? Or will you all really make some updates and some changes that's backed by the community?
So Sam, you look like you were going to chip in, but if you want to say something more. I think it depends on what the feedback is, because we don't know what it is yet. So I know we have a conversation plan to talk about following up your study sessions to learn more about what you heard there and how we can best follow up with the community. So we're trying to take in all this information to then
we
Yeah.
heard a lot now. And
Yeah.
from your urban
Oh, yeah,
planning
yeah.
perspective,
Yeah, no, we're
is there some
taking all of,
did some things come to the top that y'all feel like, oh, we should take another look at that? I know that Sam mentioned the formerly incarcerated. What other things for you all have came top to mind as y'all listen to folks? Raise questions around the lot size, raise questions around the basement, raise questions around the ADUs. Will it be accessible? Is it going to be the water and electrical line? Like those things came up. Can that be changed? What came up for y'all? I really want some reflections from y'all.
So yeah, and that was thank you. That was a question earlier also about kind of some of the concerns we've heard, and then how does that funnel into potential changes to the plan? Not just today, but I think throughout the last round of the last round of engagement, we've certainly heard loud and clear that there's concerns that new development that is enabled, or whether it's enabled by the zoning code changes or the existing zoning, that new development may have the potential to exacerbate displacement pressures. And we do want to explore that and look at how we can deploy our various tools and strategies, and if it requires changes in the plan. Obviously, anti-displacement is a core goal of our department, the department, the mayor. And so we want to make sure that we're analyzing that. But we also have been trying to gather, best practices and how other cities have explored that. Also recognizing that if we don't allow housing to be developed, that also can contribute to displacement. So we're trying to balance those diverse goals and ensure that we're responding to that feedback, doing the analysis that we've committed to. So that's one area that we've heard a lot. We've certainly also heard a lot about ensuring that the city's housing strategy is balanced and it prioritizes homeownership. And I think you're going to continue to see additional policy commitments and goals and investments around homeownership, as you, I hope, are all seeing in your neighborhoods over the last few years, whether it's the down payment assistance program, our targeted programs around new construction, things like that. And then you heard there's also some technical things that we have heard that we think will add, will make direct changes to the next version of the plan, including the one we talked about earlier about strengthening language around the rights and policies for individuals returning from incarceration. And then some of the other things, we also want to continue to gather feedback. And so I think it'd be preemptive now to say, oh, we're going to change X, Y, Z, because we're going to continue to gather all the feedback. We'd love to hear the results of your study session. That's something we want to try to find a time to get on the calendar so we can hear the feedback that came there. And just like with any other planning process, we're going to continue to gather that feedback, summarize it, talk to our policymakers, talk to our elected officials, and figure out how that feedback can inform the recommendations to make sure that they best align with the goals. So we're absolutely listening, and I'm sure you'll see changes, just like there was changes that were made to the last version of the plan before the one that got presented to the council based on neighborhood feedback. And that happens in all of our planning processes, and this one will be no different.
there's a question about Facebook. So I did not make this live on Facebook because we're recording many things and I didn't want to have 2 videos on Facebook, but we're going to be posting the video from tonight's session as well. So that was just to try to get it out in different ways, but it was the same presentation yesterday at noon to answer that question.
When y'all ask people what they want, when one of the slides you said that they wanted different housing options, do you also have a survey that asks people what they don't want? And could that be included in the presentation?
We certainly, I mean, we're always interested in people's feedback on, what types of housing they do and don't want to see in their neighborhood. So yeah, that's something that we expect we'll ask and hear about at the upcoming meetings for sure. One of the things we've heard loudest, I think, is people want to see the building codes and maintenance codes enforced on landlords. That's one of the things that we've heard. You asked other things that came out throughout the feedback today and earlier. And so I think maybe another thing we'll try to do is figure out ways to have representatives from our Department of Neighborhood Services be part of some of these discussions, so they can talk about the tools and strategies they're using. So
And I think one of the things that people will understand around tax credit housing is if you just say, do you want more Gorman type of development in your neighborhood? And then most people would say no.
Yeah. There was a question about zoning changes in the suburbs as well. That's an interesting, that's a very valid point. The fact that some of our suburbs are doing similar efforts to update their zoning code to address some of the past exclusionary parts of the code, but others maybe are not. And yeah, at the city, we don't have a ton of control over what other cities are doing, but we know that there's advocacy communities out there that are advocating for similar changes at the city as well. And there was a question about what would be the effect of if the suburbs do not also change their zoning code, will that somehow exacerbate affordability? I think the answer there is we want to make sure that we are accommodating diverse housing choices in the city. And so while we can't 100% control what the suburbs do, if there's limits on growth and limits on affordable housing in our neighboring communities, and we don't allow those developments to be built here, that will certainly result in exacerbating displacement pressures. And I think the city has a pretty good track record of attempting to be balanced in our approach there.
Hi.
So it's,
Do you have a second for a question? I I see this coming from a lot of these sort of end goal perspective, but looking at like a lot of the questions a lot of people have and concerns about, landlords not being held to the same standards, and obviously what I want to say, like individual home ownership for every Milwaukeean is not going to be a realistic goal at the end of all of this. But how do we make certain that those who do own, primarily those who say own a lot of properties, who may or may not be based in Milwaukee, that they're encouraged, and not just encouraged, but motivated to reinvest in those properties in a way that benefits the tenants and the people who are living in those properties and neighborhoods?
I'm sorry, but like, how is it unrealistic to think that everybody should get a home? I really don't get that. That should be the goal as far as I'm concerned. Like, is housing not a human right? And that's kind of why I asked that in the chat earlier, but no one said anything about that. I'm just really confused.
You know what? I mean, if we can get there, I support
So-
that. So that was, yeah.
So I think I want to end on at least that's a good place to maybe end. We've been here now 90 minutes and we're happy to continue to engage. We have some upcoming in-person meetings. We're happy to talk to people one-on-one. I think you all know we can put our email address into the chat, and the comment around housing as human right, that certainly is a important touchstone. And I think that drives, we talked about the overall housing puzzle that motivates a lot of our work here at the department. Just as we're working on proposing updates to the zoning code, we are also working with our colleagues on a variety of strategies, some of the ones we talked about, to increase home ownership, to provide additional affordable housing units, to support our colleagues who are providing housing for the unhoused populations. And so that is absolutely one of the overarching goals that drives all of this, is that housing is a human right. And so we appreciate that everyone here, my guess is, shares that belief. And so thank you for spending your time having this dialogue. It was valuable. We are taking a lot of this into account. We're gathering feedback from across the city. This is one step in that. We're also looking forward to continue this discussion in person at the upcoming open houses. We have some small neighborhood discussions scheduled. I know a few of the people on this call. We're happy to continue to, we look forward to talking to you all in your neighborhood groups in upcoming scheduled meetings. And please email growingmke@milwaukee.gov if you would like to continue the discussion in a different way as well. So thank you all. And I think we'll end the webinar now. And we just really appreciate everyone, again, choosing to spend your time this way to advocate for a better city, better housing options. And we really appreciate all the feedback.
Really quickly before you leave, you don't have to keep taping. I just wanted to know if you would add the comments from yesterday to the recording of today, so that we can hear the questions
What they doing
and process them all together.
Okay, you mean like have the presentation and also the questions posted that were asked,
Yes,
like kind of adding them to the FAQs then?
the ones that were, okay, so today we hear the questions and we're going to hear them on the tape when you post it, but we didn't hear the questions from yesterday. so
Right.
that we can hear both sets of questions at the end of the presentation, so we can see exactly what you all are talking about, if I may ask that, please.
Got it. Okay, yeah, we can be transparent about, yeah, the answers to all the questions from today and yesterday.
And I'm sorry, I know you, Sam, you mentioned you wanted to transition, but it looks like the question that I posed in the chat and Sai that just spoke, we both wanted to see if you could speak a little bit to your partnership with the Community Development Alliance, and how the city functions with that entity that almost seems to function as quasi-governmental.
So the Community Development Alliance is a group of housing stakeholders that the city is a member of. It's a nonprofit that helped develop the city's collective affordable housing plan. And I think that's, and we do sit on, we sit on committees with them, and we certainly view them as an ally in the various efforts that the city has underway to achieve the goals of the collective affordable housing strategic plan, which are to create 32,000 units of new housing that's affordable to residents making less than $15 an hour over the next 10 years, and also to help 32,000 new Black and Brown homeowners access and preserve homeownership. So that organization helped develop a plan with a variety of strategies to do that, and the city is a partner in some of those strategies. So thank you. All right, everyone have a great evening.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Good night.
She just needed another.